Zainab thought she knew the truth about God and the afterlife until a freak accident changed everything. Watch as she shares her incredible near-death experience that shattered everything she believed about religion and eternity. My name is Zainab Faruqi, and I'm 47 years old. I live in a modest two-story house in Lansing, Michigan, where I've spent most of my adult life. Before everything changed, I was just your typical middle-aged mom, working as a pharmacy technician at the local CVS and raising my two teenagers alongside my husband Kareem. Growing up in a devout Muslim family, my faith was everything to me. I prayed 5 times a day without fail, fasted during Ramadan, and tried my best to follow all the teachings I'd learned since childhood. My parents had immigrated from Pakistan before I was born, and they made sure we kept our religious traditions alive in America. That winter morning started like any other. I was getting ready for my early shift, rushing around the kitchen making breakfast for the kids before school. The news was playing quietly in the background, something about a snowstorm heading our way later that week. I remember thinking I needed to stock up on groceries after work. What I didn't know was that our carbon monoxide detector had been malfunctioning for weeks. The batteries were dead, and somehow both Kareem and I had forgotten to replace them during our usual house maintenance routine. It turns out our aging furnace had developed a crack in the heat exchanger, slowly leaking the odorless, colorless gas into our home. I started feeling a bit dizzy while packing lunches, but I brushed it off as just being tired. My daughter Amira complained of a headache and wanted to stay home from school. My son Zane was already upstairs in the shower. Kareem had left early for his job at the engineering firm downtown. The dizziness got worse as I was loading the dishwasher. The room started spinning, and my vision became blurry around the edges. I remember reaching for my phone to call 911, but my fingers felt numb and clumsy. The last thing I saw was Amira's terrified face as I collapsed onto the kitchen floor. I later learned that Amira, despite feeling sick herself, had managed to call emergency services. The firefighters arrived within minutes, finding dangerous levels of carbon monoxide throughout the house. They got us all out just in time, me unconscious, Amira barely able to walk, and Zane, who had passed out in the shower. The paramedics told me later that my heart had stopped in the ambulance. For 4 minutes and 37 seconds, I was clinically dead. But what happened during those minutes felt like an eternity, and it completely transformed everything I thought I knew about life, death, and what comes after. Looking back now, I can see how my whole life had been leading up to that moment. All those years of devoted prayers, all the religious teachings I'd accepted without question, all my certainty about what happened after death, none of it had prepared me for what I was about to experience. The doctor said I was incredibly lucky. If Amira hadn't made that call when she did, if the first responders had arrived even a few minutes later, or if the carbon monoxide levels had been just slightly higher, none of us would have survived. But I know now that luck had nothing to do with it. What happened next was meant to be a divine appointment that would reveal truths I never expected to discover. I had always judged my life by how well I followed the rules. Did I pray at the right times? Did I dress modestly enough? Was I a good example to my children of what a faithful Muslim woman should be? These questions consumed my daily thoughts, shaping every decision I made. My relationship with Kareem was built on this shared understanding. We met at the Islamic Center of Greater Lansing during a community event. His family, like mine, emphasized the importance of marrying within the faith. We raised our children with the same values, sending them to weekend Islamic school and making sure they understood the importance of our beliefs. Working at CVS sometimes tested my faith. I'd have to handle prescriptions that went against Islamic teachings or serve customers whose lifestyles contradicted everything I believed. But I always reminded myself that it wasn't my place to judge. Only Allah could do that. The morning of my near-death experience, I remember feeling particularly blessed. Amira had just been accepted to Michigan State University with a full scholarship. Zane's grades were improving after a rough start to high school. Kareem had recently received a promotion. Everything seemed to be falling into place, exactly as I thought it should, for a family that followed all the right rules. Looking out my kitchen window that morning, I watched the neighbor kids waiting for their school bus, bundled up against the Michigan cold. Mrs. Peterson from next door was shoveling her driveway, and I made a mental note to send Zane over to help her later. These small moments of ordinary life seemed so permanent, so secure. I had no idea that in just a few hours, everything I believed about the world, about life and death, about God, about truth itself, would be completely shattered. The certainty I'd built my life around was about to crumble like a house of cards in a strong wind. They say that near-death experiences change people, but that doesn't begin to describe what happened to me. This wasn't just a change. It was like being born again with new eyes, seeing the world as it really is for the first time. The truth I discovered during those 4 minutes and 37 seconds would alter not just my life, but the lives of everyone around me. As I moved through my morning routine that day, I had no way of knowing that by sunset, I would have a message so important, so urgent, that I would spend the rest of my life sharing it with anyone who would listen. A message about what really waits for us on the other side, about the true nature of God, and about the choices we make in this life that echo into eternity. The moment my heart stopped beating, everything changed. There wasn't any tunnel of light like you hear about in other stories. Instead, it felt like being suddenly dunked in ice-cold water, a shock that jolted through every part of my being. I found myself floating above my body in the ambulance. The paramedics were working frantically, their voices muffled like I was hearing them through thick glass. One of them was doing chest compressions while another prepared the defibrillator. I could see myself lying there, pale and lifeless, still wearing my blue CVS uniform shirt and the silver necklace Kareem had given me for our anniversary. But the strange thing was, I didn't feel scared. It was like watching a movie about someone else. I noticed details I never would have caught otherwise. The young paramedic had a small coffee stain on his sleeve, and there was a crack in the ceiling of the ambulance that looked exactly like a question mark. Then everything went dark. Not the kind of darkness you see when you close your eyes, but a heavy, pressing darkness that felt alive somehow. I could feel myself moving through it, being pulled deeper and deeper by some invisible force. Suddenly, I wasn't alone anymore. There was a presence with me, beautiful and terrible at the same time. It didn't have a physical form I could see, but I knew it was an angel. Not the gentle wings and halo kind from greeting cards, but something so powerful and ancient that just being near it made my soul tremble. The angel spoke, but not with words. Instead, images and understanding flooded my mind. I saw my whole life playing out, but not just the things I'd done. I saw the ripple effects of every choice I'd ever made. The time I'd been unkind to a coworker and how that had affected her whole day. The moment I'd helped an elderly customer with her prescriptions and how that small kindness had given her hope when she needed it most. But what shocked me most was seeing how my dedication to Islam had influenced others. I saw people I'd encouraged to follow stricter religious practices, thinking I was helping them. The angel showed me how this had actually led them further from the truth, not closer to it. I wanted to protest, to defend my beliefs, but in the presence of this divine being, all my arguments felt hollow. The angel showed me more, scenes from history I'd never learned about, truths about Muhammad that had been hidden or changed over time. It was like scales falling from my eyes. Then the darkness around us began to change. I could see other souls moving through it, thousands of them, maybe millions. Some were being drawn upward toward a light I hadn't noticed before. Others were drifting downward, their spiritual forms growing dimmer as they descended. The angel showed me why. Each soul's destination wasn't random. It was the natural result of what they'd believed and how they'd lived. I saw Muslims, Buddhists, Hindus, and people of other faiths, all discovering that their sincere beliefs hadn't been enough. The truth had been available to them, but they'd chosen different paths. I watched as some souls realized their mistake too late. They called out to Allah, to their various prophets and gods, but received no answer. The angel showed me that there was only one way to reach the light above, only one truth that could save a soul from drifting down into the darkness. The angel then guided me closer to the descending souls. The experience was beyond terrifying. Their anguish was so intense, it felt like a physical force. I saw people I'd known in life, good people who'd prayed 5 times a day and given to charity, yet they were being pulled downward. Their prayers to Allah echoed uselessly in the void. I recognized Brother Kareem, who'd led prayers at our mosque for decades. He was there, his soul dimming as he descended, still clutching his prayer beads. Next to him was Sister Fatima, who'd taught Quran classes to our children. Their faces showed the same horrible realization I was experiencing, that all our devotion had been misplaced. The angel then showed me something that made my heart ache. Souls of children who died, including those from my own community. But unlike the adults, they were being drawn upward toward the light. The angel helped me understand that they were innocent, not yet fully committed to false beliefs. This mercy brought me both comfort and deeper sadness, knowing how many parents would never see their children again. We moved through this spiritual space, and I began to notice something strange. Some souls seemed to be wearing chains made of light, but they weren't physical chains. They were made of beliefs, traditions, and practices that had bound them in life. I could see my own chains too, glowing with Arabic calligraphy and Islamic symbols. They were beautiful but heavy, pulling me downward. The angel then took me to what looked like a vast courtroom, but it was made of pure light. Souls were appearing before a judge I couldn't see directly. The presence was too bright, too holy. Each soul's life was examined not just by their actions, but by what they'd chosen to believe when the truth had been available to them. I watched as a woman I recognized from our mosque was shown all the times she'd encountered Christian missionaries, all the times she'd seen churches or heard the gospel message but dismissed it. Each instance was like a witness against her. The truth had been there, but she'd chosen to stay in her familiar beliefs. Then it was my turn to face judgment. Every time I'd proudly declared the Shahada, every time I'd taught my children that Jesus was just a prophet, every time I'd dismissed the Bible as corrupted, all of it was laid bare. The weight of my error felt crushing. Unlike many souls I'd seen, my judgment wasn't final. I was being shown all this for a reason. The angel communicated that I would be given a chance to return, to share what I'd learned. But first, I needed to see more, much more. We began moving toward the light above, and I could feel my chains of false belief beginning to dissolve. As we moved upward, the light grew stronger. It wasn't harsh or blinding. It felt like being bathed in pure love. I began to see what looked like different levels or realms, each one more beautiful than the last. But the angel made it clear that these weren't the multiple heavens I'd been taught about in Islam. Then I saw him, Jesus Christ, but not as I'd known him from Islamic teachings. Not just a prophet, not just a good man, but God himself. His presence was overwhelming, filled with a love so powerful it felt like it would break me apart. The lies I'd believed about him fell away like autumn leaves in a strong wind. I saw the truth about the Trinity, not 3 gods as I'd been taught, but one God in 3 persons, a mystery that suddenly made perfect sense. It was like trying to explain color to someone who'd only seen in black and white. You can't really understand it until you experience it. The angel showed me scenes from history, the real history, not what I'd learned. I saw Jesus' death on the cross, which I'd been taught never happened, and his resurrection. I saw the early Christian church and how the message had spread. Then I was shown how other religions, including Islam, had twisted and distorted these truths. I witnessed something that shook me to my core, the true origin of Islamic teachings. The angel revealed scenes I'd never known about, showing me how political power and human ambition had shaped the religion I'd followed so devotedly. The real Muhammad was very different from the perfect prophet I'd been taught to revere. But this wasn't shown to me to condemn Muslims. Rather, it was to help me understand why so many sincere people had been led astray. I saw how Satan had crafted this deception carefully over centuries, using people's natural desire for structure and rules to lead them away from true salvation. The angel then took me to what seemed like a vast library, but instead of books, it contained people's life stories, not just what they did, but what they could have done. I saw alternate versions of my own life, paths I could have taken if I'd accepted the truth sooner. I saw my children growing up without the burden of false beliefs, my husband and I leading others to real freedom instead of deeper bondage. Then came the hardest part. I was shown people I'd influenced, friends I'd encouraged to be more devout in Islam, neighbors I'd invited to the mosque, even my own children whom I'd taught to reject Christian beliefs. The angel helped me understand that I would have to answer for this, not just for my own choices, but for how I'd affected others. But in the midst of this heavy revelation, I was also shown hope. I saw how my near-death experience would impact others. I watched as my future testimony would help people break free from the same chains that had bound me. The angel showed me Muslims who would hear my story and begin questioning their beliefs, starting their own journey toward truth. The light became even brighter, and I found myself in what I can only describe as the throne room of heaven. The presence of God was so powerful here that all my previous concepts of worship felt like pale imitations. This wasn't the distant, impersonal Allah I'd prayed to 5 times a day. This was a Father who knew me completely and loved me perfectly. In this throne room, I witnessed something that completely transformed my understanding of salvation. I saw souls entering heaven, but not through their own merits or good works alone. Each one had placed their faith in Jesus Christ, and their lives reflected that faith through the sacraments and good works inspired by the Holy Spirit. I finally understood that salvation was a gift of grace, received through faith, affirmed by the sacraments, and demonstrated by deeds. The angel then showed me how my religious devotion, which I'd thought would save me, had actually been a barrier. All my careful adherence to Islamic law, my ritual prayers, my fasting, these weren't paths to God, but attempts to earn what could only be freely given through faith in Jesus Christ and participation in his sacraments. I was allowed to witness actual conversations in heaven, souls who had recently arrived meeting Jesus face to face. Some had been Muslims like me, others Hindus, Buddhists, or atheists. What struck me was how many said, "But I was so sure I was right." The love they encountered was overwhelming, but for many, it was also too late. The angel then took me to see something I'd never expected, the saints from Christian history. But they weren't distant, unapproachable figures. They were alive, vibrant, and completely humble. I saw them worshiping alongside former Muslims who had found the truth during their earthly lives. There was no hierarchy, no special status, just joint celebration of God's grace. Then came the most difficult vision. I was shown hell, not just as a state of separation from God, but as a place of real torment, where flames symbolized the intense suffering of eternal punishment. The souls there weren't being tortured by devils with pitchforks. Their torment came from being in a place where God's presence was utterly absent, and the fire was both literal and a representation of their unending anguish. I saw religious leaders I had respected in life, men and women who had led thousands astray. Their suffering was intensified by seeing the impact of their teachings. Each soul that arrived because of their influence added to their torment. Yet even in their agony, they acknowledged the justice of their situation. The angel then revealed something that broke my heart. Millions of Muslims earnestly praying, but their prayers hitting what looked like a ceiling of brass. Not because God didn't hear them, but because they were praying to a false conception of God. I saw how Satan used their sincerity against them, keeping them satisfied with religious performance while missing true salvation through faith in Jesus Christ, participation in the sacraments, and living out good works inspired by genuine faith. Then I was shown my own future if I chose to return to life. I saw myself facing rejection from my Muslim community, struggles within my own family, accusations of betrayal and mental illness. But I also saw the lives that would be transformed through my testimony. The angel made it clear. This path would be difficult but eternally significant. What happened next is hard to put into words. I was given a choice. I could stay in heaven or return to share what I'd learned. The comfort and peace of heaven were overwhelming, and part of me wanted desperately to stay. But when I saw the people who would be impacted by my story, including my own family, I knew what I had to do. Before sending me back, the angel gave me one final vision. I saw my own judgment day, but this time from the perspective of having completed my mission on earth. I saw myself standing before Jesus, not as a judge, but as my Savior, hearing the words, "Well done, good and faithful servant." The joy in that future moment outweighed any temporary suffering I would face. Coming back to my body felt like being squeezed through a tiny tube. My chest hurt from the CPR, and the bright hospital lights were shocking after the pure light I'd experienced. The first face I saw was Kareem's, tears streaming down his face as he held my hand. Our children were there too, their eyes red from crying. The doctors told me I was lucky, that most carbon monoxide poisoning victims don't survive. But I knew it wasn't luck. When they left the room, I tried to tell my family what I'd seen. Kareem thought it was just confusion from the lack of oxygen. Amira and Zayn exchanged worried looks. Nobody wanted to believe that their devout Muslim wife and mother was saying these things. The first few weeks after coming home were the hardest. Word got around our Muslim community quickly. People who'd been my friends for decades stopped talking to me. The imam came to visit, suggesting I needed psychiatric help. My own parents called from Pakistan, crying and begging me to take back what I was saying. Kareem was patient at first, thinking it was just a phase. But when I stopped attending mosque and started attending a local church, participating in the sacraments, and engaging in charitable works inspired by my new faith, things got tense. He would find me praying the rosary or reading the Bible, finally understanding verses that had been twisted in my Islamic education. We fought about what to tell the children, about whether I was having a mental breakdown. But slowly, something amazing started happening. People began reaching out privately. Other Muslims who had doubts, who had their own questions. A friend from my mosque confessed she'd been secretly attending church services and was curious about the sacraments. My daughter Amira started asking questions about what I'd seen, really listening to the answers. 6 months after my experience, I was invited to speak at a small church. I was terrified, but the moment I started sharing my story, something shifted. The words just flowed. People were crying, including some Muslims who had come out of curiosity. 3 people accepted Christ that day, choosing to express their faith through baptism and committing to lives of good works. Now, 2 years later, our house has become a sort of unofficial meeting place. Every week, seekers come with their questions. Former Muslims, doubters, people who've had their own supernatural experiences. Kareem still hasn't accepted my new faith, but he's softened. Last week, I caught him reading the Gospel of John when he thought I was asleep. The death threats have mostly stopped, though I still get nasty messages on social media. But it doesn't matter. Once you've seen what I've seen, once you know the truth about eternity, nothing in this temporary life seems very scary anymore. My biggest joy came 3 months ago when Amira told me she'd been secretly praying to Jesus. She'd had her own encounter with God's love while reading the Bible I'd given her. She expressed a desire to participate in the sacraments and live out her faith through acts of charity. Zayn is still wrestling with it all, but he's asking good questions. Every night I thank God for giving me a second chance, for letting me come back to help others find the truth. I know my story sounds crazy. 2 years ago I would have been the first to dismiss it, but I can't deny what I saw, what I experienced, and I can't stay silent. Too many souls are at stake. Too many sincere people are on the wrong path, just like I was. If even one person finds the truth through my testimony, everything I've lost will be worth it. If this video touched your heart, please hit that like button and subscribe to our channel. Don't forget to ring that notification bell so you never miss another powerful testimony of God's love. Share this with someone who needs to hear it. You never know whose life might be changed forever.